This is the podcast overview for Module 12. We will be covering Chapter 13, Chronic Illness, in this module, and this is the first of two modules that we'll be doing in our last week, week 6. So here is the to-do list for this module and week. Here are the objectives for Chapter 13, and you can click here to get an overview of each of these and to preview what the chapter is going to cover. Basically, we'll be looking at the ins and outs of chronic illness, what's it like for individuals who live with chronic illness, which is usually a lifelong illness and can depend on when you get diagnosed, how long that is. We'll look at the various types of chronic diseases that are most prevalent today, and start to look at some of the ways in which people cope with chronic illnesses, as well as all of the different psychosocial factors that come into play with chronic illness, the ways in which it kind of pervades a person's life, and you have to work around the illness, basically. And then these are the lecture slides for Chapter 13. There's a video assignment that goes with the module, and it is on cancer support groups. So this is the worksheet that goes along with the video. You can click here for the video. You're going to be watching David Spiegel. He's a doctor out in California, out of Stanford, who really started the support groups for women suffering from metastatic breast cancer, which is incurable and usually a terminal illness. The average woman with metastatic breast cancer has about 3 to 5 years to live. And so he was one of the first that started running support groups for women, really just to give them a place to talk about what they're going through and the impact on their lives. And what he found was really interesting in terms of the type of support that was given to the women and what it did for them as a result on their outcome. So some surprising findings there, which then led to a ton more research, and many starting to do what he did and run support groups in hopes of replicating his findings, and in fact, most did. So it's a great video that goes along nicely with the topic of chronic illness and how one copes with chronic illness. And that's going to be due on the 13th, which is the last day of class. And again, this is a short week because we're not going until Sunday. Class ends Friday. So you want to just make note of that with your discussion for this module. The responses, your original post will be due Thursday, and your responses to others will be due Friday. So just plan around that. As it is a little bit of a divergence from the norm. The discussion goes along with Chapter 13 in the Longevity Project, which is all about traits of masculinity and femininity. So again, you're going to be completing the assessment questionnaire in the chapter, and then you'll be answering these questions below. You'll be defining masculinity and femininity, why it's important to distinguish those labels as different from homosexual or heterosexual, which is a very different concept altogether. Masculinity and femininity are traits that both men and women can have. Then you're going to want to describe the relationship between feminine traits and long life. We see a connection there, a relationship. What kind of relationship is it? How are feminine traits connected to longevity? Explain the link between social ties and gender. We touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about sociability, but it dives a little deeper. in this chapter in terms of the importance of social ties and how we see some gender differences there. And then what happens to men's health after they suffer a loss? What do we typically see happen? And again, you want to be using the termites as examples to support your statements. And then lastly, being educated on the health benefits of feminine traits, feminine characteristics. There are many great benefits that go along with that for men and women. How might you respond to a stereotypical statement such as, my son won't have sissy traits? Okay, so we hear that a lot, in culture today. People not wanting their boys to have more feminine traits, when actually some of the feminine traits, can be very helpful, if not, adding to one's longevity and health over the lifespan. So with that in mind, how might you respond in a very academic way, right? So be looking to formulate a response that would integrate in now the research of what you've learned about the value of feminine traits. We still live in a very male-dominated environment, world, and sometimes some of the very best feminine traits aren't applauded as much as they should be for the value that they give and add to a person's life. So that's the challenge for answering the last part of that discussion post. And then that will do it for Module 12.